just so I can get a feel for how much sort of upfront um, cover. Oh, you did. Okay, thanks, Joe. That's perfect. Awesome. Thank you, Isabel. CB Ed did not. Okay. Yes, Tony, sweet. No. Okay. What we'll do is we'll do watch afterwards. Awesome. Okay. Well, I appreciate that most people saw it on YouTube. So, okay, that's good to know too, because I've been uploading all of our workshops to YouTube, and sometimes they're linked concept. Like the one follows the other, but most of the time they're not. Most of the time they're separate workshops. And this is actually really helpful for me to see that people do engage with that content on YouTube. And the other thing too is they're long. They're like an hour and a half. And if you're not like participating at live and you're asking questions live, like one of the things too is it's like they're really helpful and they obviously cover a lot of things that we simply just can't cover in tutorials because they're longer in terms of like and a little bit of, obviously requires quite a bit of would be the word for it. Just like it requires a more flushed out and in-depth look at some of these features than other ones. So I appreciate that people are still exposing themselves to the workshops on YouTube. Peter said, I find the little icons that show is the folder status very hard to make out and tell apart the folder status. Okay. Suggested this feature request form that maybe be easier to distinguish, but nothing happened in. Yeah, yeah, totally. So I'll just give you a bit of background information, Peter, in regards to um, I guess like how the changes are made in ACDC from version to version. I think it's really important. They suggested this as a free feature, just to be very clear. I think that's like a really important first step. Um, so how does this work? So in ACDC, typically what we'll do is we'll get like a series of suggestions for future products. Um, and it is actually it is two things. It's the simplicity of the feature change for the developers, and oftentimes ones that interact with the user interface, so the actual visual appearance of what you see on your screen, can be a bit more complicated. I'll explain why. The second reason why we make changes in ACDC is if a lot of people have asked for them. So that being said, I think there's two things that approaches to this. A, you can always be like, hey, this is a feature that I'm looking for on the forums, and polling the room and sort of seeing if that's something that other people want as well, and then approaching the developers with that. However, just to be clear, asking it for the developers, they do see that and they do consider it. But when it comes with the user interface, keep in mind that the product that we produce is also translated into Spanish, Russian, German. It's translated into French, obviously, and so we have all these languages that we need to translate the software into, and that comes with some real limitations into how long words can be. And this is specifically can be a problem sometimes with German because there's compound words that are quite long in German, and so that takes up a ton of user interface space. So, oh, it's not an icon. Sorry, it is an icon, not text. Okay. Well, ultimately, you're getting the back end for me that in regards to how these changes how these changes happen. So yeah, so those are some considerations when it comes to user interface. Is just like how much space is going to be taken up by these sort of tools. But like I said, number one is asking. Number two is more people asking, basically. So, um, okay, like yeah, and then I mean, I wouldn't obviously don't give up on, but it's like one of those things that it's just like it might just require other people asking as well before the developers can change it. So did they actually get back to you? Did the developers be like, "Hey, this we've considered"? Did they respond in some way? Just out of curiosity. But anyway, okay, we should get started. So today, um, okay, nice. The icons. Yeah. No, no, no. Okay. All right. Well, it's one of those things that they will respond to you. So, um, I'm gonna hide this for the now. So, just for the benefit of a couple people who were not in the previous workshop, and just so we are all clear, I'll just show you where you can experience that. So we have an ACDC Photo Studio YouTube page. So ACDC youtube.com// ACDC Photo Studio. And if you go to videos, typically we upload our videos. Anything that's new is uploaded here. So I did an intro to databases last month, and then also we have workshops with playlists rather with a whole series of different content. Specifically, one of them is just workshops, And currently there's 133 videos in our workshop folder, which means that there is upwards of there is at minimum 133 hours of content there. So lots of content to experience. So if you were unclear on where to find that, that's where to find that, and that's where you can get a bit more in-depth sort of to the first YouTube video, sorry, the first video I did on the database. So I'll just really quickly, I'm not going to cover what I covered in that first workshop for the benefit of everybody who did watch that, but I will explain what I covered. So in the previous workshop, I covered a couple things. First and foremost, we talked about like what contents is in the database. If you're ever curious about this, you can always navigate to help and about ACDSee Ultimate 2026, or rather the help contents, and you can look up the database and it'll showcase what types of metadata goes into the database. So the database is something that is created in ACDSee regardless of whether or not you wanted it. It's just something that's required for the product to work. It's where all that information, like thumbnails and metadata, ends up living temporarily, basically. It's where you save that information to. So what we did, and we talked about this in this workshop, is that that's information that's really relevant to you because ACDSee is a management software, and adding that metadata like ratings and keywords and labels and stuff like that all ends up getting added to that database. Then we talked about converting the database. So taking a database that you'd created in an older version of ACDSee and basically utilizing that and updating it for your new version. This is relevant if you're using the new software and you want to utilize your old database and not recreate a database from scratch. So we talked about that. Then we also talked about cataloging files. And cataloging files is something that is a precautionary measure. Basically, in ACDSee, when you add information to the database, like this metadata, blah, 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 it gets saved there. And in the event that you lose your database due to a hard drive crash, or maybe you lose the file or something happens, we recommend that you embed metadata within your files so that they can be cataloged in the future. And what that means is it means you're actually going to save the metadata that you've created with your file, like the keywords, the labels, the ratings, the categories, etc. You're going to save that information to the file itself. And by embedding it, it then makes it catalogable. And so you can catalog it in the future and therefore reconstruct your database in the event that you've lost your database. We're not going to be talking about those things today. I just want to showcase that that is what we talked about in the previous workshop, and it provides a really important foundation to what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so given that those things is what we talked about, we're going to be, this is like I said, this is going to be sort of an extension of what we talked about, but we're going to talk about database maintenance and optimization. So one of the major questions that arose out of the previous workshop, and you might notice this if you navigate to tools and database, is this whole section that exists kind of underneath convert database. There's the ability to backup and restore your database. There's this ability to quarantine files and to optimize your database and to perform something called database maintenance. And so we're going to be engaging with backup, restore, optimize database maintenance, and we're also going to be talking about finding duplicate images just to sort of add something else to this as well. But basically, when we have a database, an active database, we can run these optimization functions. So if you're familiar with the home page, which was introduced in 2026, we have all these little icons that are added here. But one of the major icons that was added is this database maintenance function. Oops. Here we go. And so by clicking on it, I'll just show that once more. Close that. By clicking on this icon here, we can basically backup, optimize, or perform database maintenance. And so database maintenance itself is like a process that ACDSee can run. So if I click on that, it's going to close the software temporarily, and it's going to bring up this database maintenance function. And database maintenance, what it allows us to do is obviously it gives us first and foremost a window to engage with something called optimizing. So much like the previous section allowed us to optimize, this also gives us a little central zone for that. But basically, some really important information is here presented to us about what about our database. So first and foremost, your folder counts are probably going to be quite a bit higher than mine if you were to click on that same icon. But the folder count is 375, which indicates to me that in the database, when I've browsed, browsing in ACDSee is when you navigate to a folder. When you do that, thumbnails are created. So the thumbnail is that little image close this, that appears right here. In this case, it appears in the folders themselves as sort of like, here's some samples of what's in your folder. And then if I click on it, all these images that you see here, these preview sized images, these are called thumbnails. Thumbnails are like an abridged version of the actual image itself, and they're quite small in file size. And so seeing a thumbnail is something that when you navigate to a folder for the first time, these thumbnails are, excuse me, created for you, and they're actually saved into the database. And we can see this if we go to help contents here and search for database. It'll say right here up at the top, it says you can store cached thumbnail previews and or edit the following information for each image or media file on your computer. So one of the things that is created for you is actually that thumbnail preview that you're seeing, and that's something that's contained within the database, in addition to the things that I mentioned previously, like categories, notes, keywords, etc. So, coming back to ACDSee, these thumbnails are something that are created for you and visualized by the software, or it's a way of visualizing an image, an abridged version of the image. So you're not like opening up or trying to visualize hundreds, potentially thousands of megabytes of images or even gigabytes of images as you scroll through a folder. And then this is obviously especially important for raw images as well, where raw images have huge file sizes. So a thumbnail, basically a conversion of an image into like a smaller file size, typically a JPEG, is created, and then a truncated version of that JPEG. So something that's quite small rather than a huge file. It's going to be like a 50 by 70 pixel image or something like that. And then that's created and then displayed to you here. And the other thing too is that these can be increased. These file sizes are created and then they're sort of visualizable in different sizes. So when that thumbnail is created, there's also a zoom, there's a size increase that are accounted for. So coming back to the database here, I'll click on that again. It's going to close this and then open this. And so as you can see in that folder count, so of the folders that I've browsed to, I have 375 folders that are contained within my database. And that's probably just like folders in my C drive. That's going to be folders on maybe external devices or sort of external hard drives. And that's going to be folders in like, on maybe a secondary drive, which in my case on my computer, I have two major hard drives. So that would make sense. And then the thumbnail count itself refers to the actual total number of thumbnails in my that is contained within my database. So in this case, ACDSee has produced 7,620 thumbnails in its process of browsing folders that are contained within the database, as you can see. So more broadly, I have this database information. So this is a breakdown of my database itself. So the information that's contained on the database is actually less than the thumbnails themselves, but there's about 109 megabytes of information. And that information is those categories and keywords and things like that. So this is text data, and so as a result, it's going to be quite small. But there's still a fair amount of it, so it's listed right there. And then we have my thumbnail cache, which is about 128.1 megabytes, and that refers to like here's the size of the thumbnails that we've created while browsing. So you'll notice that in the section set here, we have what we call a Windows hierarchy. So we have my local computer here, and then my local disk, and then I have two external drives, and then it looks like I have my second hard drive here. And so if I was to click on one of these, you can see that I have these actions that appear at the bottom here. Number one is I can remove the thumbnails from a drive entirely. I don't necessarily recommend doing this if I interact with this hard drive routinely, if I want to optimize my database in that way. The other one is remove all the database info. So again, this might be relevant if you're interacting with an external drive where you don't actually need that database information. And then finally, we have remove orphan folders. So orphan folders in this case are folders that were once created in ACDSee, but then are no longer usable because they've been moved or deleted in Windows in some way. Patricia says, my home icon brings me to pictures and not the menu that Adam is showing. How do I get it? Your home menu is probably showcasing, let's see here, would it be in this local disk here? It would maybe be within program files, or not program files, sorry. it would be showcasing some form of, oops, where it says pictures here. But it will be within the local disk or in some way. But again, your hard drive is also going to be unique to your system, so it might look different than mine. So Peter said, probably a similar question. It looks like my summary of database shown when starting database maintenance shows a header for removable drives. There are 33 entries under this, and I would like to remove them from the database, but would that be a problem later? Um, okay, let me think about this just briefly here. But I wouldn't take any action right away. Obviously, we don't want to like remove something from your database without understanding it fully. But okay, so it shows a heading for removable drives. Okay, so this would be, in this case, both design and video are removable drives in my case, but they're not listed by a heading function here. There are 33 entries under this, and I would like to remove them from the database, but would that be a problem later? Okay, so I think I don't see that icon personally for mine. So one of the things that I would do in this case is I would take the term removable drives in this case, and I would see what we can find, or either in the help section or the help contents here for that term. Let's see if I can find anything for maintaining the database. Okay, so let's see here, removable drives. Okay, remove thumbnails, remove all database info, remove orphan files, and change binding. It doesn't pop up on here. So let's also review this right here. Well, we have the opportunity to help. No, it brings up the same section. Okay, well, that's fine. Okay. Is it listed actually as a, there's no files, just folders? Oh, well, I mean, that's the case for me, right? I don't have any files located here. These are just folders. This is like a local disk here that contains multiple, folders in this case. Same with the videos in local disk. Is that what you mean, Peter? While Peter's answering that, George said, if I have my database and photos are in, say, drive F, but I have a hard links from drive C and drive D pointing to my folders in drive F, does the database catalog them as duplicates and therefore 3 times for each picture? Or is their database smart enough to see that they point to the same file and therefore avoid duplication? This is a tough question because I think that if you were to move those files in some way outside of the application, it probably wouldn't see that that movement has occurred. If you've moved them within the software itself, like, hey, I've moved this file from this folder to a separate external drive or something like that, it's going to have like knowledge of that. There's actually a section here under optimized database. If I was to click this guy right here, and actually move through the process of optimizing, there's these 2 items that pop up, right? So there's number 1, it's optimize the database tables and fields, and what it does is it removes obsolete information from the database, reduces the space used by database fields, and then reindexes the tables. So it's going to attempt to reduce this database information size right here. And then it says remove orphans from database. And I think this is probably more what you're referring to, where it says orphan database entries are caused when files or folders are deleted by applications other than ACDSee. So, and again, this might be literally like, removing the file entirely from the software, but there's also instances when you move a file and it's not visible to ACDSee because it wasn't moved in ACDSee, it was moved outside of it. And so when that happens, there's probably going to be a disconnect between where that file was once and where it is now. And so probably going through the process of removing orphan files is a way to reset that process and to go through that. And it, so Peter says in response to his previous comment, they represent SD cards from which I can't import images from my cameras. I can't see that there is a need for them except if I want to include the SD card into my database. I do not want the cards in my database as the fields are already imported. Oh, well, it sounds to me like you have the answer, right? It sounds to me like those were previously of use or, but have no longer relevancy to you and you don't want them like clogging up your system. So you could just remove all database info from those entries, right? As long as they're listed there and you get to select the specific ones, then you could go through that process. If you've moved the files that were previously on these cameras or the SD drives or whatever onto your hard drive and they are now located in a different location and you're not pointing to the location that you're removing from the database, then I think removing that should be fine. Yeah, I mean, it's not the same file. What would be a problem is if you were to choose your local disk, for example, and then I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to remove all my database information. And actually, before we do any of that, Peter, maybe one of the things that we talk about next is backing up your database now, so that just in the event that, perhaps something happens, we can go through this process of just restoring our database. So I mean, it sounds like it's fine. Like you could if you want to, but if you want to hold off, one of the things that we could probably do here is just back up our database and create it. So, well, you've done it already. Great. Well, we'll get to that in the video as well. So, anyway, so my point being is that the optimized database function here, right? So we have the ability to remove the thumbnails directly from a specific folder. We have the ability to remove all the database info, so all of the metadata that was anything that would have been put into the database is going to be removed from the folder or element of your hierarchy that you've selected, and then removed orphan folders, so folders that have been deleted or moved outside of ACDSee. Optimized database provides us the same functionality, so we get to go optimize data and table sets and remove the orphans from this. Pardon me. And this is an automated process. Let's see how long this takes. I don't think it should take too long because I have a pretty small hierarchy here. So it's now complete. It looks like it reduced my thumbnail cache by about, it looks like 20 megabytes. So that has been removed. And then there's no more orphan folders in this case. So that process is complete. If I click close, it's going to restart the program because I've made changes to my database. It's typical when I make changes to my database that occurs. So it'll give it a moment to restart. Have a sip of coffee. Okay. So the next thing we're going to talk about here is if I navigate to database, right? So we talked about optimizing database and database maintenance. Briefly, we just got to that by clicking database maintenance, but I can also go to optimize here and it'll bring up that same screen that we are familiar with. So the one that I just utilized to optimize my database and reduce my thumbnail cache. This is the one that I can use here. But I can also click on this to back up my database. I can also navigate to database and back up here. And backing up literally is going to create a file of your database that contains the current contents of that database, right? So this is going to be something that you can reference if you want to restore your database. And it's unique to creating, if you were to create a new database, right? That's going to create a new database that contains no contents in it whatsoever. And if you're going to convert your database, it's going to be converting from a prior version of ACDSee. So a database that's been created in ACDSee 2025, for example. Well, creating a backup in this case is all of the contents that you currently have within your database are going to be saved and then are referenceable. This is going to be distinct, right, from creating a new one or utilizing a previous version. Now, with that being said, when you when you convert your database, you could point to a backup file rather than just the original database that you've created. So I can go to create a new backup. I'm going to go through this process. I'm going to click next, and then I have the ability to make some choices here. I can not include thumbnails. So thumbnails themselves, as we've described in this process, have like generally a slightly higher than half of the average size of your total database, and probably take up a lot of space. So you can omit this if you'd like. It says it's recommended to save space. This means that those would then need to be rebrowsed, the thumbnails themselves. So you can also include thumbnails for offline files and include thumbnails. So I will get to your question in a moment, B, but we talked about it pretty extensively in the previous one. So if I wanted to include thumbnails, I could. It's just going to increase the file size. I'll just leave it as is. I'll leave it as recommended. And then backup files for image document. I don't have any media that I'm needing here. That's fine. And then all files of specific types on your hard and local drive. So we'll do that. We'll just give the default in this case. Media would include, I believe, include movies and PDFs and that sort of thing. And archive would be literally archived files. All files specific to the types on local and network drives. Pardon me, not using network drives, just the hard drive. all files specified in the folder type, including subfolders, which we don't need to because we're just going with the base hard drive in this case. So I'm going to click next, and then I'm going to choose a destination. So I can actually, in this case, it's literally called ACDSee Backup. I'll just call it novel because it's one that I'm just creating for this workshop. But it will be located in this actual location. So if I click on browse, I'll have the ability to see exactly where that is. It looks like it's in app data local, it's within ACD systems, and then it's within the current version. So 2026, that's what 190 Ultimate is. And then within the ACDC BK folder. Okay, it's already listed. That's fine. Go forward, and it's going to take a moment to do that. And we'll back up this one. So what B asked, was I supposed to convert 2025 to the 2026 version? I thought I was told I didn't have to. And so my understanding, based on your question, B, is you were talking about the database. What I typically recommend doing when you switch over to a new software is to convert your database to the most recent version. Excuse me. And so that process is described pretty in depth in the YouTube video that I mentioned at the top of this workshop. But basically, we in the previous workshop on databases, we talk about the process by which you can convert that database, taking all of your previous database contents and adding it to 2026. And then this is a surefire way to basically incorporate all of those elements that you created, things like categories, labels, keywords, etc., and make sure they're incorporated into the new software. And then, all right, it doesn't impact that original database as well. So if you still have ACDC 2025 on your computer and for some reason you still utilize it for certain things, it's not going to impact your relationship with that software in any way when you do this conversion process. It's just taking the contents of that and making sure that your new version has that. Because when you started your new version, like all of us do, when we upgrade our product, right, those things are then omitted, right? You don't have access to those same categories, you don't have access to those same keywords, etc. So going through that conversion process allows you to just take that information and utilize it. This is going to be extremely relevant for people that really make use of the management functions of ACDC. If you're an image editor and you typically only use develop mode or edit mode to edit your images, you might never have to interact with converting your database because you primarily use it to make visual changes to your images, right? That might not be the case if you're like, for example, if you're a wedding photographer and having accurate information about not only the folder structures, but every single keyword and metadata and a copyright information that you've added to your files, then that's going to be really relevant to you for keeping up to date. Again, it's really customizable based on your use of the software and your own workflow. But something to consider is that it's probably within your interest to convert that database, even if you're only the person who adds a couple keywords or maybe rates your files or something like that. Consider it. Okay. Looks like my database has been created. I can click finish. And from here, right, so that's created a new backup of my existing database. And from there, again, a backup is not, we're not now using that backup. That backup was it's a point in time. So anything that we've currently had in our database, any categories, keywords, etc., would have been saved within that backup. But it is now not the current version that we're utilizing. We're still utilizing our original database. So we are not going to be saving new content to that backup. That backup is just a static figure that contains what it had when we backed it up. So if I want to get into the habit of saving regular backups, so that I have a couple versions of it, and then maybe deleting some of the. Maybe I say I have 5 active backups running at all times, or something like that, and then I delete the 6 when I save the latest version or whatever. That isn't necessary. I'm just saying that if you have contents that you really value at this current point, saving a backup might be relevant to you. Maybe you save a backup or save over a backup when you have just completed a new large job in ACDC. Again, this is going to be more exactly if it's a photo time capsule. It's going to be relevant to you if you are in a position where you're a commercial photographer and you just finished a large project and you want to make sure that that database information is then saved. So just a couple case scenarios why you'd want to consider this. And then restoring your database. This is going to impact me at all because I don't have anything novel or new in the database that I just backed up, but I could reference that database, right? So, welcome to ACDSee Database Restore Wizard. This wizard will lead you through a process of restoring your database or files. Click Next, and then I have that backup that's listed on this backup date. So I saved it on October 24th at 9:31 a.m. Pacific time, and then there's this backup right here. So it knows what the most current backup is. It looks like provided it's saved to that backup folder. If it had not been, if it saved, you saved it to an external drive, I would have to browse for it. This is relevant. I've mentioned previously when cataloging files, when I'm saving and embedding that metadata to your files, that gives you this ability to reconstruct your files in the future or your database in the future. Yeah, you can restore to a different location. We'll talk about that in a sec. But this might be really relevant for you to actually save that backup to an external drive or something like that. Something that you know is safe in the event that we're maybe concerned about a hard drive crash or something like that. Hey, I don't want to like put all my eggs in one basket. I want to save my backup on a different hard drive. So then I would insert, some form of secondary drive and I would save it to that secondary drive. And to do that, right, I would go through that process of the database here. I'd back up my database. I'd go to next. I would back up all types of files. We do that one, and then I would move forward in this, but I would not select this folder. I would select a different location. Maybe I'd save it to my desktop, or I'd save it to an external hard drive, and I'd move it elsewhere. The point is, though, that this is then going to be referenceable when I go to restore my database, and the restoration in this case is going to occur based on browse for location because it's not looking in the default location. We're then looking for it in a new location. So yeah, basically to answer to CB's question, you can restore to a different location, right? We would just need to understand like where the original location when we saved the backup, where that was. And in my case, the example I gave is okay, I was worried about, hard drive malfunction, so I saved this to an external drive. I then just need to know which external drive that is and then browse for it when I go to restore my database. So we can back up our novel one and then we'll go through this process right here and I would move forward. And if I do that, it's just telling me that my default database is going to be eliminated when I go through the process of this, right? We're not going to move forward because there's nothing really that I would gain out of backing up or moving to this backup database. But if there was something, if I had lost my database, then this would be relevant to me. So I can move through this backup process. I want to talk about finding duplicate files as sort of the summary of this workshop, but I just want to sort of open the floor for any other questions. There's some questions that I truly didn't have the answer to. I know that George's question earlier is not something that I necessarily have the capabilities to answer in full. I would say that that's maybe something that's like ultimately a developer question. But if there's any other questions related to sort of the database and the function of performing these actions, then yeah, let me know and we'll cover it. I'm just gonna have a sip of coffee. Let's have another look just to make sure I didn't miss anything. So CB asked, how do you move the entire database to a different drive? And say a different network drive. Okay, well, there's a couple of ways that you could do this. Let's see here. The most obvious way, right, is to actually move the database yourself. You don't necessarily need to move the database in ACDSee, but you do need to be able to open from it because once you move that database, it's going to. I wasn't Peter because it's something I talked about in the first workshop. But if you will benefit from it, I'll talk about it at the end of the workshop. But basically, if I end up moving my database, because as we can see here, if I go to I don't know, go to new. This is where my database is saved, right? So if I navigate to this on my folder, if I click on browse here, right? It's going to open up this location. It's under 190 alt. It's under default. That's where my database is saved. Well, I can navigate to that on my on ACDSee, right? And then I can at any point I can at any point sort of move that file and then just open it elsewhere. So if I wanted to move that to a network drive or to a secondary external hard drive or something like that, I can then open up my database from that location, right? So I can then choose and select where that database is. The other thing too is I can actually just go into file and database and save a brand new database in the location of my where I want it, like wherever I deem fit for this database. And this is going to be especially relevant if you've just started 2026. So I've determined a new location for my database to live. And then what I can do is I can actually go through the database conversion process. So I can convert my old database once I've saved a new one, and I can utilize the contents of what I had in 2025 in the location of my new database. So there's a couple different methods to move a database, as long as you're either, as long as you're in ACDSee, you're pointing to the database that you want to use, going through the process of file, database, and open, like I said, to actually navigate and find that database and actively use it. Keep in mind that you're going to have constant access to that that database, and I believe whether or not it's you can do that on a network is not something I have access to or no, but I certainly know that you can save your database to some form of like external hard drive that is then plugged into your computer. Okay, so Joe asked is if you set a keyword or color or something to a raw file, you can't embed to that file. So how do you remove the embed pending? Okay, so actually, this is a great question. It's kind of beyond the scope of this workshop, much like Peter's question, but we'll talk about them both. Um, okay, so let's just because I'll come back to finding duplicates. It's a really quick thing to talk about just at the end of this workshop. So let's answer Peter's question first, and then we'll answer Joe's question. So Peter asked, "Are you going to talk about embedding metadata in the database?" So, so you don't need to embed metadata in the database. Whenever you make a change in ACDSee, so if I go through and I add this information, I have some landscape images here, and if I embed, if I make a metadata change to these, so I say, oh wow, all these images are perfect. I'm going to rate them as 5. It's going to reset all the ratings. Note that for the images that were not rated 5, I have this embed pending metadata icon that appears in the bottom left hand corner. And let's say I'm going to rate these all purple because they're all they evoke purple for my workflow. But I have 2 metadata changes, right? And then let's add one keyword as well. Let's add what are my keywords? So I have just like I already have a nature keyword. Some of these have forest in them, so I'll give them a forest metadata, a keyword here. Okay, so I have 3 changes. I have a rating, I have a label, and I have a keyword change to these images. So, to getting back to Peter's question, when I do that, that's already in the database. My clicking on those icons, me clicking the 5, me clicking the purple, me clicking the forest keyword, that's in the database. But the question then is, well, I have this pending metadata icon that pops up here. And so I think where Peter's question is going is how is this actually embedded to the files themselves, not the database? And so if I was to and again, I've mentioned this previously in this workshop and also in the previous workshop, but in the event that my hard drive fails and I lose my database, I will not have access to these files with a rating of 5 or a label purple or a keyword of forest. So what I can do as a user is I can actually embed this information within the files themselves, so it is then catalogable in ACDSee. And when I catalog a file, it reconstructs my database based on the metadata that I've embedded within my files. So it's a failsafe, right? In the event that I have some database loss. The other thing is that if I save this or embed this information within the file, right? And I have a friend that is also using ACDSee, and I want them to have access to this metadata, I could send them these files, right? And they can then catalog those files in order to gain that metadata from them. Really niche case scenario. Why would you need to do that? But you can. So when this icon appears, right, I can do this thing where I right click on my image and I go to metadata and I go to embed ACDC metadata. So typically when you exit ACDC, it will prompt you to perform this action on every file. But in the event that I want to do this right here and right now, I can embed ACDC metadata and go through the process of embedding the metadata into these 12 files. And then once that is complete, at any point, like I said, in the future, when I have that hard drive malfunction or something like that, I can navigate to tools, database, and catalog files. Cataloging files will allow me to pull ACDC metadata, including categories, keywords, tags, and collections, blah, 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 and add it to my my current and new database that I've had since I started ACDC, since my hard drive failure or something like that. So this gives me the ability to reconstruct database information using the files themselves. So hopefully that makes sense. Get in the habit of embedding metadata in your files. It's a failsafe. Secondarily, pulling from that information, right-clicking, metadata, embedding, and then going through the process of tools, database, and cataloging files if we want to catalog information from the files themselves. Okay, so that's Peter's question. George asked, "How can I set the database?" Oh wait, no, I missed somebody's one. It was in regards to raw files. Oh, here it is. Joe's question. If you set a keyword or color or something to a raw file, so describing what I just did, you can't embed to that file. So how do you remove the embed pending? So you can't embed to that file. No. Okay, nice. You saw it. But there is a distinction here. It's an important one. It's still an important question. Raw files you can't embed to a raw file, and raw files aren't functionally editable. This is because they're a proprietary file. So Canon makes a particular raw file. ACDC nor any photo editing software, other than maybe Canon, if Canon produces a photo editing software, can't directly interact with those files. So what typically photo editing softwares like ACDC do is they create a secondary reference file. They're typically hidden in ACDC. They're called sidecar files. If you ever see a file in ACDC that has XMP as its file extension, that is a sidecar file. So when you make a metadata change or a visual adjustment to a raw file, right? Or actually, no, let's not say visual change. So let's just say metadata change. If you make a metadata change to a raw file, it's not sent to the raw file, it's sent to the sidecar file that when you open up the raw file, ACDC then references the sidecar file. So the sidecar file contains exposure plus X, or tune adjustment -4, or rating 5. That sidecar file, that's where that is contained within. And so then that ACDC then references it. But in this case, raw files kind of work the same thing in the same way. If I was to right click on an image and go to metadata and embed ACDC metadata, that's going to embed it within the sidecar file. And then I can also click on clear embed pending icon if I wanted to just remove the icon because I find it irritating. So hopefully that answers your question, Joe. Good question. George asked, how can I see the database explore the image count that each drive has cataloged? How can I see the database explorer? How can I see in the database explorer the image count that each drive has cataloged? You can't see that, but as I mentioned previously, if I go to database and database maintenance, if I click on that, right? Based on the active database that I have, right, I could see that there's a thumbnail count of 7,152 browsed images. So what this is telling me is that when I'm browsing my files, it has created a thumbnail for this amount of files per se. So there's not a total image count necessarily, but there is a thumbnail count. So this is the amount of files that you have browsed to or interacted with by the browsing process. So that matters because just because you have edited or made metadata changes to a portion of your images doesn't necessarily tell you which thumbnails have been added to the database itself. So this gives us an accurate count of the amount of images that have been added to the database on the basis of browsing. Peter asked, question re-embedding keywords to IPTC. It seems that if I always embed to IPTC, it only adds the keywords, but if I then change the keywords, the embed only adds the new keyword. Spot on the refile versus database. So IPTC, what Peter's referring to, IPTC is a generic metadata field, um, where this generic metadata field doesn't require ACDSee to view the contents of. IPTC is a general field that basically is visible in any. It's visible in the files themselves. So if I was to click on the properties section of an image in Windows, it would bring up the contents very similar to the way that we have it presented here. So adding keyword information is just simply embedding to a file that is then it is a writable file. So let's see what Peter's question is. It seems that if I always embed to IPTC, you don't need to embed to IPTC. You just need to basically add something and click apply. There's no embedding process that's required here. I suppose the applying could be considered embedded in if that's the terminology you're using, but no embed necessary. It only adds the keywords, but if I then change the keywords, the embed only adds the new keyword. Spot on the file versus database. I'm not quite sure what your question is, Peter. Is there a way that you can rephrase this? Basically, when I add information to IPTC metadata, this section, this field here, this is truly just like writing new file, like information to these fields that are preset within this file. So you don't need to embed anything. So I'm uncertain of really what you mean. But if I was to add a keyword, for example, say like, let's say, I don't know, boulevard or something like that. Boulevard's added, it's then applied to that image. And if I was to navigate to this same image, so where's this? This is in pictures. Okay, so pictures, and there's a folder named duplicates. Is that correct? Yeah, duplicates. I navigate to the folder I just added this information to, click on this file, go to properties, go to details. The tags is the keyword here, and you can see that Boulevard has been added. If I was then add something new, right? I was to add Boulevard, uh, yeah, square, right? That information is then going to be visible there as well. So if I was to say, let's see here, pictures, duplicates, and properties, it's then added under that field as well. Keywords to IPTC is a function where you take ACDSee keywords, right, that exist within the ACDSee metadata, and then you move them to this field. But moving that is just going to replace the keywords, or in this case, it's going to add whatever doesn't exist within the section. So you said I use keywords for photo organization. I want them to be IPTC as well as via the EXIF. EXIF, you can't put keywords within EXIF. EXIF metadata is for image information. So it's like what's taken. Yeah, that doesn't work. This contains things like shutter speed, f-stop, ISO. This doesn't you can't like add a keyword field to this. Does that make sense, Peter? When you take a photo, oh, okay. So I think what you're describing is this. Let's see here. I've kind of haven't done this in a while, but if I was to take ACDSee metadata, there was a quick and efficient way to do this. I believe if I right click on an image and embed to IPTC, yeah, okay. I think this is what you're describing. So if I was to take what is the metadata on this file? Let's have a look. So if I go into organize forest, that's it. That's all the metadata on this. Let's see if I can find one that has more. Let's just add a bunch. It really doesn't matter what it is. Abstract, aerial, after party, animal, architecture, astro. So we've added a bunch to this. If I wanted to add that information to this IPTC field, so let's remove this first and foremost. I would right click on my image. I would click on metadata. I would go embed to IPTC. So I could take these keywords that I've added to this image, and this would place it into a particular category. It's going to place it under keywords. So that would then take that ACDC metadata and move it into this IPTC field. This is relevant, obviously, if you want someone else to be able to see this information. Um, yeah. So if that's what you wanted, if I wanted to take that metadata and move it over really quickly, I would go right click on this image, go to metadata, embed to IPTC, and then I would embed keywords to IPTC. It also works with categories. It will move it into the same column here, the keywords, or embed AI keywords to IPTC. So there's also a bunch of AI keywords that are automatically created for an image, and then I could then henceforth add it to the keyword section here. And I believe if I did so, let's just see. I think it's just strictly additive. It didn't do anything there. So I think that's because I haven't actually viewed this image. And so it hasn't created any keywords for it yet. So hopefully that's helpful. But basically, right clicking an image and I can go to metadata and then I could use that function. Yeah, you could merge or overwrite. And this bottom section here, merging would add it, obviously, and then overwriting would remove any existing metadata and place it there. Yeah. Let's answer a couple more questions. Getting close to the top of the hour here. Let's see here. Okay, we've answered that one. Um, okay. Uh, yeah, embed to IPTCs, amend your action under metadata. So David answered or tried to answer your question there. Got it. Isabel, just to be sure and confirm that I understood correctly, when you delete all the orphan files, there's no risk of deleting the original file. I think let's just check the wording on that, but I'm pretty sure that is correct. So there's a section here where it says remove orphan files from database. Database entries are caused when files or folders are deleted by applications other than ACDSee. So if you have orphaned files, this is something that is going to remove them from your database. And this occurs when you move a file or delete a file externally from ACDSee, and it no longer can map that file because it doesn't exist for the system. So the question is, just before confirm that, when you delete all the orphan files, there's no risk of deleting the original file. If my understanding is correct, that's the case. There is no way to do that. There is a section here where you can also remove orphan folders. Um, I I'm actually uncertain of this functionality. I'd have to look at the help function. Let's see what it says. Remove orphan folders, deletes any out of date or broken references to missing files or information for the selected folder. It is only possible to check for open folders located on your computer. This option will not be visible if the folder is located on a network. Okay. If you're going to interact with the orphan files, use the optimized database functionality. Like use this function right here to do that and move through that process. I'm hesitant to suggest that using remove orphan folders would not impact your workflow. Again, you might not be using them necessarily, but I'd be uncertain depending on what your personal hierarchy and your folder structure looks like. That might be bad. The one thing I would do is prior to doing any action, is to just back up your database like we discussed, so we're not going through the process of deleting something that you don't need. So back up your database first, and then optimize your database and make sure to go through the process of removing the orphans from the database. And that should dramatically reduce, obviously, the database information as well as potentially the thumbnail size here or thumbnail cache, and that it'll remove them actually from so that ACDSee is not visualizing those anymore. But yeah, just back up your database just in case anything screwy happens that you're uncomfortable or unhappy with. At least you have a database that you can point to that still contains those. But that would be a good process to get into. Is if I don't even do enough database maintenance on ACDSee. This is something that I would like to get in the habit of doing. Just it cleans up those files and makes it less weighty to utilize. Um, So BDL asked, what if you wanted to keep your ACDC metadata and also have it in IPTC? It doesn't move it necessarily. It just, so if I have this contents right here, it's not actually removing it from the ACDC metadata. It's just taking this content and moving it to the IPTC field. But the actual metadata themselves, B, are not removed when I go through the process of right clicking, metadating, embedding, and then add embedding to IPTC. So taking the ACDC metadata and moving it into the keywords folder, not a problem. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about before we summarize for today is just to find duplicates. This is really quick and easy to describe anyway. So basically, this window allows you to find duplicate images. Because we're talking about database maintenance, right? And just removing files we don't use anymore and utilizing the system to do that. There's also a way to check for like duplicate images. So if I have way too many copies of the same image, I can go and I can delete them from a specific folder. So we can look at that. But basically, it allows us to choose a folder. In this case, I have my pictures folder here, and it allows me to search for files within this pictures folder that either have very similar naming structures or visually are the same file, and it allows me to remove them. So I can choose to add more folders here, right? I could go in and I could add a whole nother folder. So if I had an external hard drive that I wanted to check for duplicates, I could do that as well. But in this case, I'm just using my standard pictures folder, and I can go through the process of searching. It'll take a moment to do this operation. And when it's complete, I will receive a list. And if I scroll down this list, right, if I was to click on landscape here, you can see that this particular landscape image, it says that there's 2 found. So let's see, it looks like this one, there's 3 found. And it will tell me the location on my hard drive for these images. So if you can see here, Landscape 91 is located under the landscape folder under release photos. And then I have another one under color matching. And then I have truly just one under landscape. So if I wanted to delete these 2 files from my hard drive, I could do that. I could go through this process of removing these 2 files. And when I navigate away and back to these files, right, I can go through and I can purge these images by just clicking on the next image in my hierarchy. So you can see here that I can go through the process of deleting copies that occur within the same folder. When I click on those, right, I still have to go through the next process in order to completely delete them from my hard drive. But this just gives me a way to visualize what I've decided to delete. I'm not going to remove these images because I do use some of these secondary or like duplicate images, but this would be how you operationalize like removing and going through your hard drive. And then I could click next and it'll walk me through the process of then deleting these files. Okay. That covers it. That's a full hour. If anyone has any other questions, fire them, but I'm going to have a sip of water here. But the workshop is formally closed. It's over. Thank you so much for participating. This will be up on our YouTube page as always. So if you have any questions about, anything that I can't answer now, you can always reach out to me on Connect as well. There's some questions that I don't know the answers to. That might be something that would be more a developer appropriate question. And I'm sorry that I don't have the answer for every question in this workshop today. But yeah, that summarizes it for today. And I hope you found this useful. And this opens up and sort of describes some tools that I've actually never talked about in ACDC. The database maintenance or optimization is never something I've talked about. So hopefully this helped at least. There are 2 options on duplicates: exact match or file name. What constitutes an exact match? That's a good question. I actually am not certain. We can look that up. Exact match. Oops. Let's see here. Let's do this. Find duplicates. Let's see what it says here by exact match or. Okay. Below the file list, specify whether you want to find exact duplicates or just files with the same name. Select images only if you only want to search for image files. Okay, so it looks like here what it's suggesting is exact duplicates or file name. So if you have images with the same file name, then it's going to be looking for this. Exact duplicates might contain more information than just the file. It doesn't further specify what's considered an exact duplicate, but my guess would be that it would have a similar thumbnail. Oh, that's a great question, Brian. Sorry, I didn't actually answer that in the workshop here. But if you go to the Connect page, we have a whole section here that's literally called Feature Requests and Development or Developer Q&A. And so if you add a post here and just say, hey, like this is something I'm curious about, or this is a feature that I'd like to recommend, I think I would specify like, hey, this is a question or this is a suggestion at the top of your thing, just to make it clear for the developers. If you have a support question is going to be maybe a question where it's like, hey, I can't resolve this issue on my own. I would contact our support department. But for a developer Q&A, just being like, hey, I'm not quite sure I know how this works or anything, that would be a place to sort of explore that question further. And so the other thing too is feature requests are taken seriously, like I mentioned at the top of this workshop. And the more people that recommend a feature, so they say, oh, the more people that want a particular thing, the more likelihood the developers are going to consider that feature for a new software, because we want to make sure that the features that we are working and improving on have a broad applicability for our user base. And then the other thing too is how efficient and quick are those features to add. Could you do a workshop on printing pictures in ACDSee? I will consider that for sure. That's something that a bunch of people have asked for. One of the common questions with printing, it's not something that actually ACDSee can do anything about, but one of the most common questions I get is, why do my images print darker than my images that I'm looking at in my and this what can I do to offset this? And it's an interesting question, and that's if this is something that's maybe similar to your own question about printing, that's a problem not necessarily with the software, but with a translation between a backlit screen as you see on your computer, and then printing an image to CMYK, which is not a light. Not RGB light method, but it's actually just like a type of toner. And so when you print an image, what will often happen is it will appear very dark or darker than the image that you saw on your screen. And there's no way to adjust this because they're completely different mediums other than improving the exposure on your image to offset for the fact that that occurs. I worked at a print shop for many years as like a head graphic designer for that print shop, and this was something that came up every single day. And it's not necessarily something that you can do too much about. It's completely different as a medium, but there should just consider that if you're ever curious about like why it prints darker, that's sort of why it's because the image that you've then printed lacks the backlighting that a screen has, and it's a different composition of color. So but in general, with printing sizes and stuff like that, I will look into it, because that's something that I haven't covered in a workshop. So I'll write down. It's a good suggestion. Yeah.